got out of the car and saw it, and I was like, I wonder who the balls was driving it right now.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a smart move, but just had to do it because I figured like the window of opportunity is going to get lower and lower and lower. So, but yeah, I seriously couldn't feel my finger. I had to look in the mirror and like get the helmet off my head. That's your phone over there.
Yep.
Are we on a study session?
Yeah. Thanks for the heads up.
Are you all thinking about no for this?
I think we need like a universal ring so that we all know, like if it's that kind of call, and be like, oh.
Yeah, okay, yep.
Yeah. Okay, two things. One, we're going to dive in today and get some Nietzsche on. Two, got to do Corsi Valley things. So if I forget at a quarter till, please remind me, or a quarter till the end of class or whatever. Please remind me to distribute that. Can anybody drop that form thing off at faculty support form? Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, let's get going. So, really helpful in the background. Really helpful in the background is having a theory of hegemony. But remember, hegemony didn't. The theory of hegemony didn't happen until 26 years after Nietzsche's death. So we're looking back with this theory. But Nietzsche really opens the door for understanding how hegemony works, or understanding applied hegemony. So. He's going to be critiquing pretty much everything, but he's going to be using religion as his case study. So we had covered that Nietzsche's in the shadow of Napoleon destroying all of the political infrastructure and Kant destroying all of the philosophical infrastructure by negating the notion of absolutes. And Nietzsche's the first person to really consider like what that means and how that's going to affect us. So. He had a very painful life, but he also worked, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 books. But we're only going to focus on 6 real, and I'm going to try to keep them in order. Birth of the Tragedy, Genealogy of Morals, Twilight of the Idols, Thus Spake Zarathustra, The Gay Science, and The Will of Power. Will of Power is actually just a manuscript. He was also a very avid letter writer, and if you bother to read the letters, they are hilarious. Or like a lot of what I'm going to be talking to you about today, he would bounce these ideas off of his friends, and they'd be like, "Whoa, hey, dude," like it was very racy for the 19th century, and even racy for today. So, like I said, he was a philosopher. Yes, sir.
If we were to read one first, which one would you read?
That's a tough one, man. Genealogy of Morals.
Just like in a nutshell, what is gay science about? Like,
We're going to talk about it today.
Huh?
We're going to talk about it today.
Okay.
But gay in this sense is happy. Yeah. As we had said on Tuesday, he's a philologist. He's one of the first people to really. People have been translating Greek for a long time, but he's the first person, I would argue, who actually understood what he was reading, and what he was reading was starting to freak people out, or starting to freak him out. And so one of the things that he fixated on is, just to put it simply, why the Greeks were so much better than Europeans. They made better art, they had better philosophy, they were more scientific, they just knocked it out of the park. He was also one of the first people to de-sterilize the Greeks. We still have a bad habit of imagining Greek culture in very sterile terms. For example, when I say Greek culture, you probably think of these white marble statues. And we tend to think that we imagine, like if I asked you to make a scene where people were time traveling back in Greece, you would have them wearing white togas, walking around with a bunch of white sculptures in a very pristine, very aesthetic circumstances. That's not the case at all. These statues were painted wildly, bright, garish things. So like when you see that, that's what it was in real life. Or when you see that, it was, like naked dudes just hanging out. Or the lions would be like chartreuse and blue. Like it was very, very bright, very, very garish, very, very over the top. The Greek culture was not this, like walking around with Socrates kind of thing. It was Socrates, but it was everything else too. So, what Nietzsche saw when he was reading the Greek text is what he called the Dionysian. They had the wild side.
Why were their sculptures painted or plated white?
Oh, no, they were painted white. I'm sorry, they were painted, and then the paint wore off after 2,000 years.
Okay.
So when we dug them up, or when we saw them, we're like, oh, they've always been this way. And it's like, no, it was 2,000 years old, man.
How do we know that they were painted?
They get the electrospectrum analysis, and they can even tell you what color was on there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a whole science to it. And people are now like, you can go to museums where they present them as they they don't repaint the statues, but they fabricate the statues and then paint it the way that it was, and they were like garish, like crazy bright yellow, blue, like boom, crazy colors.
There's no like painted pictures from the Greeks. Like they didn't take pictures of their own stuff. But, like obviously they would have had to have painted the picture.
Actually, no, like paint as in a colored thing on canvas didn't survive. Like we all of the things that we have of Greek culture were painted by Europeans imagining what the world looked like. So we have Renaissance paintings of Greeks, but no, none of the paint survived, as our paint won't survive. So recognizing this wild element in this otherwise sterile environment, Nietzsche identified it as the Dionysian after the god Dionysius, Bacchus, the god of wine and drunkenness and inebriation and orgies and crazy stuff. And so what Nietzsche said, what we recognize when we look at the Greeks now is he calls the Apollonian, the high culture, the sterile philosophy, and this very high, very morally upstanding. It's like, yeah, that was there for sure, but we're totally ignoring this other half. So when we think of the Greeks, we think of graceful, stoic, dignified, and it's not that wasn't there, it's just that's only half of it. So what we lost in our imagination of the Greeks is the Dionysian, the grotesque, the orgies, the indulgence, of which our culture, or the culture in which Nietzsche is writing, that's absent. So in our culture, we see a little bit of the Dionysian. Think about, just a second. Nietzsche's going to argue, look, you can't have one without the other. Because that's not what being human is. The Greeks figured that out. We didn't. That's why they're better than us. If you try to suppress the Dionysian element, the animal inside of you, then you will make that part of you fester. You will make that part of you grow stronger. And this will set up a very nasty cycle. So this process of suppressing half of what you are and then punishing you when that part flares up is a way to control people for Nietzsche. He's like, that's hegemony. He didn't call it hegemony because hegemony wasn't a theory yet, but that would be a model of hegemony. So, for example, in our culture, some real easy examples is look at the current fight about how we use shame to control women. Case in point. I'm poor, scared, alone. There's no way I can care for this child. Abortion is murder. You know, choice. Okay, well, thanks for saving my life. Can you help me get some decent health care? Hey, I'm kind of sickly. Do you think you can make sure I get a decent education? Boop, 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 boop. You could read the Bible. I'm kind of sick and undereducated. Do you think you can help me get a job and a living wage? You could pray. I'm sick, undereducated, and I don't make much money. Could you help me find some affordable housing? Doop, 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 doop. Oh no, I'm pregnant. Is there some way you can help me bring, there's no way I can bring this child into the world. That's murder! And the cycle goes on, and on, and on, and a good chunk of the population is controlled because that part of their life is denied. So we're also forgetting the strength of vulgar behavior and satire. That's one of the things that fascinated Nietzsche, is he's like, look, these plays, these high works of art, have fart jokes in them. And they've got satire. Comedy was not art. And there's nothing funny in medieval theater at all. They didn't see comedy as something that could be a form of art. But the Greeks did. Amazingly so. So recognizing this, yes sir.
Like how the news pushes fear on people, would that be an
Oh,
example?
yeah, I can control you with fear. Totally. That's the two principal modes of control are fear and loathing. I make you afraid and hate yourself and others.
It seems like, a tactic to tear everybody apart kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what Nietzsche is going to say. This process of what suppression and repression does to people, this is going to open doors for Freud. That's what Freud's whole gig is you've got a part of yourself that you're suppressing, and that's causing you to have this neurotic behavior. But most importantly for Nietzsche, the thing that by his own words presses him to work himself to death is that we have lost the sense of the thrill of being alive. By suppressing the Dionysian element, we've sterilized life. And I can demonstrate that to you by simply asking you, if you received any sex ed, and they didn't mention in sex ed that sex feels great, that's the Apollonian over the Dionysian. A Greek class would be like, this feels awesome, check this out. In our culture, did you get that? Did you get any tips on how to enjoy sex? Did you even talk about the fact that sex is enjoyable? Nietzsche would say, yeah, that's a great big lie, because sex is great. And if we pretend it's not there, then it's going to get perverted and weird, and that perversion and weirdness is going to be used to punish people for being what they are. The Greeks, by contrast, according to Nietzsche, and granted he was a little bit infatuated with the Greeks, he said, look, they fully realized humanity and expressed it. Now, of course, that's slavery, but but at least as far as this accepting the Dionysian element as Nietzsche saw it, and what suppressing the Dionysian element can do as far as controlling a society, there's a certain amount of sociological data that would support him. So what's worse, the culture that he found himself in seemed to be focused on destroying the Dionysian as much as possible, suppressing the Dionysian as much as possible, with shame and fear. So look at, in our culture, we're not as uptight as 19th century Europeans, but think about something like a rave, right? That's an explosion of Dionysian element. And generally, we suppress that. We found a little niche for it in our culture, but it's something that you only do at a certain period of your life, and it's also kind of, we laugh about it, we're embarrassed by it. It's like admitting that you masturbate, which, no offense, but you all do. The Greeks would look at this and say, yeah, that's good, but, where are the orgies? Because you guys are just phoning it in. You're totally missing out on the opportunities here. Okay, yeah, that's an important thing too. But what Nietzsche's argument here is that we are suppressing part of what we are. So when you deny that aspect of humanity, individuals and societies are going to be missing something valuable. That's why Europe, for Nietzsche, was incapable of creating great art. He's like, none of this stuff that we're making 1,000 years from now, people aren't going to dig it up and go, wow! But we dug up the Greeks' stuff almost 2,000 years later, and we're going, wow! This is why. Because they are complete humans. So from this point on, right now we're still in the birth of the tragedy. From this point on, Nietzsche refers to himself as the Dionysian, as the Bacchus. He's like, I'm going to be Bacchus. I'm going to incite this in us. And to his credit, he's pretty good at it. And that's also, it's important to look at what the title says, Birth of the Tragedy, through the spirit of music. His pursuit in the Birth of Tragedy is to understand what made Greek tragedies different than anything else he saw in European literature. Sure, there's a lot of really bummer stuff in European literature, 19th century medieval European literature, but it's all shame, with no catharsis. Like, one of the things that distinguishes a Greek tragedy is it has catharsis. You're supposed to have this big oh at the end, something deep that you have a hard time talking about. All the stuff in the medieval literature was just like, yeah, you suck so bad you made God kill himself. So this in turn led Nietzsche to his next major question, which led into his next major work, and that is the genealogy of morals. Where do morals come from? Now remember, we're in the wake of Kant, right? Kant just obliterated the idea that there's anything absolute at all, but including a notion of absolute good or absolute evil. So Nietzsche asked the question, where do moral codes come from? I mean, if we don't have God revealing them to us, or Aristotle explaining it to us, or whatever, if there's not something revealed to us, what drives the development of a moral code in a society? Now, in the 21st century, this isn't that revelatory of a question, but that's because it took us 100 years to catch up with what Nietzsche was saying. This, by far, is his single most important contribution to critical thought across the board. I have read the Chinese narrative, I have read the Indic narrative, I have read the Greek narrative, and as far as I know, this is the only person, the first person in the history of the human race to stop and ask this question. And it's important to recognize he's responding to Kant. So like the Buddhists ask a bunch of really interesting questions, and the Vedic practitioners ask a bunch of really interesting questions. And there's a lot of people in there that ask questions that no one else asked before. And too with the Confucians and the Taoists and everyone else that we looked at. But Nietzsche is the first straight philosopher to say, wait a minute, I think society is entirely constructed. How is it constructed? So he recognized that morals are constructed, historical, and can be explained by observable forces in the world. Like, if, I don't know, the sixth chimp experiment. You guys remember the sixth chimp experiment? Okay, that's now I can explain why we don't touch the bananas through observation. So what Nietzsche says, well, we should be able to figure that out with us. Where did this story come from? And again, he's really the very first person to ever do this and give us the vocabulary for doing this. So if you have a big no duh when I point this out, you have Nietzsche to thank. So he's going to look, he's all right, Greece is amazing. Let's look at where we are. So he looks at 19th century Europe. And one of the things that's very Nietzschean is he was 100% convinced that his era was not right. Like, not in an absolute moral sense, but he's like, there's something really crazy going on here. And so he's going to say, look, our story, our culture, developed in a very specific context, and our morality came from a very specific set of circumstances. And so he's like, all right, well, I'm going to figure out what those are. I'm going to find out why we don't touch the bananas. I'm going to find out where we got that code, touch the bananas, is a reference to the sixth chimp experiment.
Okay, and so then the bananas are also the Dionysian, like that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can think of the bananas as the Dionysian. Why do we hate ourselves?
Okay.
Why do we suppress this?
He's looking at who had the host, kind of?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we get to go with that. He's going to look at how do we get, he's going to say morality is conditioning. Who conditioned us? And this is where he develops his notion of Slavin moral, the slave morality, which is what he's going to say we are experiencing. Again, remember, he's writing this stuff to his friends. And they're all like, whoa, dude. Like, people really flipped out on his Birth of Tragedy, and it's like, I wish I could be like, wait, like 6 more books, then you could freak out. So Nietzsche would find, if he were, like, I could time travel him right here. and he was in this course, he could find abundant examples of slave morality. I'm going to unpack what he means by slave morality in detail. But one that sticks out that I can't not think of every time I hear this phrase is something that you see in the American spirituality movement, which is a sentence, something along the lines of, as long as you recognize a higher power. Like it doesn't matter what religion you worship, as long as you recognize a higher power. And Nietzsche would say, Nietzsche was very fixated, he's a philologist, he fixated on language. So he'd be like, what the hell does that sentence mean? There was a recent, Bill Maher was on the Colbert Show, and they had a little titty about religion. Steve Colbert and Bill Maher went back and forth. And Colbert was basically saying, well, you need to recognize a higher power. And Nietzsche would say, hey, yeah, so see, that is the sun. It's like way bigger than me. It's literally over my head, and it's going to survive for billions of years. And I recognize that fact. But that's not what you're talking about when you tell me to recognize a higher power, is it? You're telling me that I need to be subservient to something in order for my life to have meaning. Why? Why is that the touchstone of morality? Well, Nietzsche's going to say, all right, let's dig in. Christianity, Nietzsche concluded, is the main reason why we have this slave morality. And there's a problem right now for him. When I say now, I'm talking about in his time. The problem is, number one, that story has been cut. Anyone who can read anything above the 3rd grade level should know that there's a big problem there. That Bronze Age myth has had the wind taken out of it. Also, it's a problem because it is embedded in Slaven moral and master-slave morality. So what do we mean? Well, first, Ethics 101. You have an action. You want to evaluate the action. Is that a good action or a bad action? Like, I threw a pen and hit him in the head. But the action itself can't be evaluated because it's just a dry, like there was a pen that flew through the air. Like that, you can't evaluate it that way. So you have two choices generally that you have to make when you evaluate an action. You can look at the intention or you can look at the result. So say, I want to improve your life, so I give you $6 million. My intention was to improve your life. You took that $6 million and you turned Longmont into a giant crack house. The result's pretty bad. So what I did good or bad? Well, if you judge me by my intentions, then it was good. If you judge me by the fact that if I hadn't given him the $6 million gift, Longmont wouldn't be a crack house, then what I did was bad. Now I'm not giving a there is a right answer. This is what, like if you take an ethics class, that's what that's going to be about. Nietzsche's aware of this. And he's going to say, okay, I can help you with this. Master morality, this is the morale of those who are strong, fully realized human beings. Nietzsche refers to them as the nobles. This is the morality of the strong will, those who can make their wishes happen. So for them, they're on this end, the results. What's good is what's helpful, what's bad is what's harmful. Or to put it differently, it's a morality based off of consequence. What actually happens. And this is only relevant to somebody who can control their life. If you can actually have control over the results of your actions, this will be the natural form of ethics for you. But this is in contrast to slave morality. Slave morality is an inversion of the master. You're the opposite of the master, largely because you no longer have control of your life. And since you don't have control of actions on consequence, I don't have control over the consequences of my life, so I in turn value intentions. That's all a slave has, is their intentions. So Nietzsche, again, for flipping out on language, he's going to look at like turns of phrase, as I do. I'm a post-Nietzschean, so I flip out on this kind of stuff too. But something like the Christian doctrine, turn the other cheek. Now, we can rationalize that. I can work that out so that it makes sense. But Nietzsche's going to say, that's just a rule that a slave has to follow in order to survive. If you slap a slave and the slave says, what? That's the end of that slave. So that is a morality that will be burned out. And the slave that turns the cheek is the slave that survives. Or the meek shall inherit the earth. You're just like, wow, what a great thing to tell the meek. Because I'm pretty sure all we give the meek is dust. So that's an expression of intention, of hopes. In this case, false hopes. It's also going to poison the mind because it denies the Dionysian.
Would that false promise to the meeks be an example of hegemony as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pretty much everything Nietzsche is going to say is an example of hegemony. But this is hegemony because by raising people to turn the other cheek, or believing that the less they ask for, the more they'll get, is a poison of the mind because it denies the Dionysian. There's an animal side of you that if I hit you, wants to hit back. And if I tell you that's bad, you don't even want to think about defending yourself. That's immoral. Well, then we're going to get the same self-justifying pattern that we saw with shaming women. Because if I suppress that animal gets stronger and more difficult for me to control. And when it presents itself, when I flip out, well then I can confirm, I can say, look at the Dionysian. This suppressed Dionysian, when we did let it out, it was crazy and out of control, like a rave. And Nietzsche would say, well, if they had been able to do that every day of their life, they wouldn't look that way.
So with the whole, like, if you hit me and I would hit you back, and if you don't suppress that and it turns into like an all-out brawl.
Well, the only reason it would turn into an all-out brawl is because you never learned how to defend yourself. That is, if I knew before I hit you that hitting you would result in me getting hit back, I probably wouldn't hit you as often.
Okay.
So you're coming at it from the point of view where I can't hit you, and you just have to suck it up and deal with it. But if it is in a world where every person I hit had the possibility of hitting me back,
Then you probably hit me.
bingo.
Can you spell the rave with the just
Dionysian? So when you go to a rave, it is out of control. You'll see little suburban kids just jacking themselves up on drugs and making wrong mistakes that they probably don't want to make. The reason that they're going so crazy is because they've never had an outlet for that in their life. In the same way that if you've been hit every day of your life, and then on day number 5,000, you're like, that's it, we're done. You're going to go crazy. And when you go crazy, I can say, oh, that's why you don't hit. Look at her, she went nuts. But if instead I allowed you to defend yourself and acknowledge your full self, then that would never have happened. If you treat people like dumb animals, don't be surprised when they act like dumb animals. So I was raised in the South. And one of the things that, like, so I observe my son's school a lot. The children are amazing sociological experiments, just sitting there just like, wow. But one of the things I've noticed about Colorado schools is you can wear hats, you can bring skateboards, you can wear shorts, you can just basically be a kid and do all kid stuff. In my school, there was a dress, when I was a kid, there was a dress code, no skateboards. One of the reasons why they wouldn't have skateboards is because they're like, you're going to use us as a weapon. And yeah, we would. Because we were in a hostile environment. My school had barbed wire around the sides of it. I'm not kidding. No windows. It was a prison. And we acted like prisoners. But if we had been treated like humans, like Colorado kids get treated like humans, what do you know? They act like humans.
So are you saying it's like the preacher's daughter that goes off to university and just freaks out and goes crazy? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And when she freaks out, that being used as an example of why she should be shamed. If we hadn't suppressed her, she'd be doing this the whole time. He's just like, no, The reason she's doing that is because you've been suppressing her the whole time.
And then, so like the frat party she goes to is the Dionysian?
The unleashed Dionysian. And because it had been suppressed and inside of her the whole time, she's going to go crazy.
So the Dionysians like all this, like all the inner desires and stuff. And so like on raves or brawls, they're big because we don't express it.
Right,
So
because we don't have a place to put that otherwise. And that's a part of who we are.
So it's like a huge pressure and like a small valve. And
Yeah, exactly. It's the hungry ghost.
So does he then go into what would happen if we didn't have to suppress it?
Yeah, in fact, that's the next couple of slides.
Why would the school that you're at like treat all the students like prisoners just to control behavior?
It was a deeply, answering this as Nietzsche would, it was a deeply Christian neighborhood. So our natures are not to be slaves. Our natures are not to be purely Apollonian. He's like, look, there's nothing wrong with Apollonian. I am a big fan of the Apollonian. But you have to have the Dionysian too. So one of the things that he was big on about like the turn the other cheek, he's like, what about, why pity? I'm not saying pity is a good thing or a bad thing, but does the person, like we've been conditioned to pity by default. But does the person actually deserve pity? It should be a case-by-case thing. A good friend knows when to help you get back on your feet and when to let you take the hit. And Nietzsche says, we have coddled ourselves with such fear of suffering that we don't know how to take a hit. So when we do, we either neurotically suppress it or freak out because we cut ourselves in half. So suffering, the suffering that we're terrified of, is part of being human. And suffering all by itself is not inherently good or bad, but it's also an inescapable feature of life. And as you recall from the very beginning of this long conversation that we've been having, suffering is the touchstone of religion. Explaining and justifying why do we suffer. The Buddhists wanted to escape it. The Jains wanted to control it. The Hindus wanted to get away from it. The Christians are going to say you deserve it. And Nietzsche's like, look, you just need to accept suffering is there and not work out this giant philosophical thing. Just suck it up, buttercup. That's what it's going to be. But it's important that we have suffering because suffering is how you learn. And there's a very special type of knowledge that you learn from suffering. And this is where Nietzsche dives in on the Twilight of the Idols. But the phrase, know thyself, is a translation. I learned Greek in 2004, so I can't transliterate very well. I don't know. This is my alliteration. This is pronounced Sophrasnia. But I can't remember my Greek well enough to spell it. There is no English word for this. It's usually translated as know thyself. But this isn't just like, your address. It's a very special type of knowledge. It's to know yourself honestly. So, two examples that Nietzsche used to demonstrate this. First off, Socrates was often called Old Pickle Nose because he was old and his nose looked like a pickle. He wasn't offended by it because he knew he was old and he knew that he had a nose shaped like a pickle. Another example that he used was in the Legend of the Iliad, Troy. There's this passage of Hector right before he fights Achilles. So Hector's about to leave, and Hector's wife says, no, don't go, he'll kill you. And Hector says, oh yeah, he'll slaughter me. I don't stand a chance. Achilles is the greatest warrior of all time. And I'm going to die, and you're going to be turned into a slave, and you're going to be walking through the streets, and people are going to say, there goes the former wife of Hector, look what's happening to her now, and you're going to cry. And rather than hear that, I'm going to go and fight Hector. So we've played chess 10 times. I told you at the beginning, you're not going to win. You didn't. That's not me being arrogant. That's Sophrasnia. I know where I am. That's just, I know it. So like false model, like if you see somebody that's really, really good at something, and they're like, wow, you're really good at that thing, and they're like, that's dishonest. You don't know yourself. You should know yourself. And the only way that you'll know yourself is through suffering. There's no shame in being Hector or being Achilles. The only shame is in not knowing who you are.
So with the whole like chess thing, what if he was secretly like super chess kid?
Well, first off, he would have violated Sophronia by not telling me that.
But I mean, him violating Sophronia, would that violate your Sophronia?
Well, no, I would learn. If he was a better chess player than me, then I would learn, oh, there's my limit.
Okay, and so then by you saying before you're gonna lose, would that turn into arrogance?
If I had been wrong and not accepted the fact that I was wrong, that would be arrogant. But if I learned that I was wrong, like if you and me race and I come in second place and I say you cheated, that's not Sophronia. But if I come in second place and go, okay, I'm 10 seconds slower than you, that's what I am. That's Sophronia. That's me accepting where I am.
But you at the beginning saying, "Hi, you're gonna lose." Like, 'cause
Well,
that's
it depends on how much self-knowledge I have. Like if I just guess, I'm gonna run faster than you without ever having seen you run, without even knowing how good of a runner I am.
But did you ever see him play chess?
No, but I know how well undergraduates play chess. And I also was right every single time because I know. Not because I'm arrogant, not because I want him to lose, I wanted him to try. But I knew that I would win, and I was right because I understand Sophronia. Yeah.
So would modesty be like going against
Modesty is a lie.
Yeah, and
If false modesty. If I'm actually suck, and I say, yeah, you might win. Just like Hector said, yeah, Achilles is going to wipe the floor with me. That's honest. And that's what we need.
And then so could like modesty be considered like a form of control through?
Well, by telling you you should be ashamed of yourself for knowing that you're good at chess.
Well, that's what I feel like
Yeah.
that's a huge part of our culture.
Oh yeah, that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So this Sophronia, which we don't even have a word for, this is the type of knowledge you can only gain through suffering. What are your limits? What are your strengths? The only way, and this is a knowledge that only you can have. And if anyone tells you, you're not strong enough, you're not fast enough, tell them to kiss your ass. Because you're the only one who can know that. This is also why the Greeks were so crazy competitive. The Olympics, yeah, that's them. But it wasn't because they wanted to find the best discus thrower. I mean, sure, they wanted to know where the best discus thrower, but they wanted to know what the 13th best discus thrower was too. They want to know but only by fiercely and honestly competing with each other can you find out who you are. Can you gain your Sophronia? So there's no shame in being the first or the last. You just have to have the courage to find out where your limits are. And the only shame is in not knowing who you are. The only shame would be in not stepping to the plate. Because it doesn't matter if you knock out a home run or not. It's totally irrelevant. It's just you knowing whether you can or you can't. This takes us to all of this is in Twilight of the Idols, where he brings another concept, agona. And agona is the root of agony for us, which obviously indicates that we're not really big fans of this. But like Sophronia, the emphasis in agona is that everyone must struggle. Life has to be a struggle, because that's the only way that you'll be able to find out who you are. Nietzsche was also famous for venomously opposing alcohol or anything else that dulls pain. He said there's two great intoxicants in Europe, Christianity and alcohol. If you dull yourself to pain, then you'll never understand what it was that caused the pain, and therefore that suffering is useless.
Do you think you would still be a post-alcoholic if you was thinking about like going out with your friends, like?
Yes.
You think you
Across the board, alcohol, period. And why would you ever, why would you be, what you're doing when you go out with your friends is you're collectively denying your Sophronia. You're collectively going, hey, let's ignore the pain in our life and pretend it's not there. Now, if you were Greek and you embraced your sophrosia, then you can go find out how drunk you can get, because that's the Dionysian. But for us, no. He's like, Europe can't drink. This denies you a very special type of knowledge. Yes, ma'am.
But by him saying that Europe can't drink, wouldn't that be going against knowing myself and knowing ourselves to drink?
Well, he's going to say that nobody here is in an environment in which they can know themselves. Because they're in an environment in which the Dionysian is suppressed, and all they have access to is the Apollonian. So, by virtue of the fact that we don't even have a word for sophrosia, he's like, then how could that would be like? Remember when we saw the Himba tribe? Were you here for that?
Maybe.
They had different words for colors.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because they've never heard the word blue, they couldn't see the blue dot.
Right.
So he's like, you're in a culture that doesn't have a word for this, so you can't see it.
So was he saying that like all Europeans were like alcohol was just adult pain?
Yeah.
Was it like, but when you said like they weren't in the spot where they could know themselves, are you saying that like they at that point in time in like society they couldn't just go to see how much they could drink?
Well, if they went out to drink, it would be how much can I numb my pain,
Yeah.
not how much can I poison myself without dying.
Okay.
Which is, actually not that helpful of knowledge to have. But, if you want to know where you are on that, then keep drinking till you die.
So you're saying the only shame is not knowing how much we can and can't drink?
I'm sorry? I didn't understand what you were saying.
No, like you were saying the whole thing with like. the
No,
only shame is not knowing
you don't even know, until today, I'm going to assume you never heard the word sophrosia before. So therefore, any drinking that you're doing is not in the service of sophrosia. So there is no shame in
No, I'm saying like in the Greek world,
Oh.
if they were to drink as much as they could, without trying not to die, that would be expressing their sophrosia?
That would be fun. Well, if they did it again and again and again and again, that's like winning the Olympics over and over and over again. We know you're the fastest. You don't need to do it again. And so, like, if you drink every time until you pass out, Nietzsche's going to say, you're not finding a limit. You're hiding from one.
This might be really silly, but is Greece not part of Europe?
We're talking about classic Greeks. We're talking like the Greece that's in the world today
Yeah.
is Christian. The Greeks that he's talking about, Jesus didn't
No, I
exist.
said Europe.
Yeah, the Greeks isn't part of Europe. I mean, yeah. But classical Greece is gone. Like, Plato's dead. They aren't making statues anymore. They're not making plays. All that culture is gone.
Right, but when Nietzsche is talking about Greeks can drink to this point, but Europe.
Talking about ancient Greeks.
And at that point it was two separate.
Talking about people that understand what sophrosia is. And at the point that Nietzsche was writing, he's the only person on earth who does. Because everyone else who knew it was dead.
So he wasn't talking about the Greeks and the Europeans at the same time? He
No.
was talking about the current, like...
Okay, for clarity, when I say Greeks, I'm talking about the ancient Greeks that were part of the Hellenian culture that worshipped the Zeus and...
With all the mythology and stuff.
Yeah, the Greeks that made the statues.
So he was in his time looking back saying they knew what was up, but nobody else does.
Yeah, so starting back at the beginning, he's a philologist who translates ancient Greek.
Okay.
He's translating ancient Greek, and while he's translating ancient Greek, he's like, wow, here's all these ideas that we don't have. So he's talking about a culture that's dead, and describing why the dead culture, that's no longer on earth, is better than the culture that he's in right now. And he's saying the reason they're better is because of everything I've explained for the last 45 minutes.
All just came together.
Okay, great. So this knowledge of sophrosia still pops up. It's still something that we do. This is why young men do stupid things. Is because they're trying to find their limits. They just don't have a vocabulary for understanding it. And this imparts on us some bittersweet moments like this from South Park.
Well, no thanks. I love life. Huh? But you just got dumped. Well, yeah, and I'm sad. But at the same time, I'm really happy that something can make me feel that sad. It's like, it makes me feel alive, you know? It makes me feel human. The only way I can feel this right now is if I felt something really good before. So I have to take the bad with the good. So
That's European culture. And Butters is acting like an ancient Greek. Butters is saying, no, I'm not happy about being sad, but being sad is beautiful. And ancient Greeks could see the beauty in it. We did not. So, as master morality originates in the strong, those who have control over the consequences of their action, slave morality originates in the weak, those who do not have control over the consequences of their action, or the results of their actions. And because slave morality is a reaction to masters, it villainizes the oppressor. That is, that if anyone demonstrates master morality to a bunch of people who are in slave morality, they will by default be like, nope. So when I gave the example of I gave him $6 million, if you felt an instant result, well, your intentions were good. And then when I pointed out the reality that my actions resulted in Longmont turning into a giant crack house, if you started to like, well, wait, that's because Nietzsche's going to say you're in a slave morality. I am in control of the results of my actions, and I need to be responsible for them. So Nietzsche saw the morality of his entire culture as fundamentally wrong and oppressive to the human animal. Again, remember, he's writing his friends about this, and they're like, whoa, dude. But this slave morality punishes you for being what you are, and then reacts to your punishment and uses your reaction to justify further oppression. So if I treat you like an animal and you lash out at me, I can say, see, look, he's an animal. That's why we put him in a cage. And Nietzsche's like, man, this whole thing, this whole game is rigged. All of European culture is rigged. So this culminates in Nietzsche's sharpest and most powerful critique of Christianity and religion in general. He's going to say religion does not teach morality. Religion simply maintains power. So some real-time examples of what Nietzsche would point to illustrate this point. This is 21st century stuff. Here's three dudes. First, we have Pat Robinson, the wealthiest evangelical Christian in the world. He's donated less than 5% of his income to any charities whatsoever, and he presently uses slave labor in a diamond mine in Africa. Here's Warren Buffett. He's the third richest person on earth. He's pledged to give 99% of his wealth to charity. He advocates for income equality, and he actively fights political corruption. Here's Bill Gates. He's the richest person on the planet right now. He's donated over $26 billion to charity and human rights organizations, and by the conservative estimates, he's saved over 6 million people's lives. But he's a Christian. So when he dies, according to the narrative, if he sincerely gives his life to his Lord Jesus Christ, he's going to go to heaven. Warren Buffett is an avowed atheist. Guess where he goes when he dies? Bill Hicks is an atheist. Bill Gates. Bill Hicks is an atheist. Bill Hicks was an atheist too. But Bill Gates is an atheist, so no matter how many lives he saves, when he dies, where does he go? He's going to hell. So you remember what it was that made Abraham the prophet of the Abrahamic traditions? God asked him to do what? Kill his son Isaac. So the lesson of Abraham is not a lesson of morality. It is a lesson of obedience. The reason why you are that prophet is because you would kill your son when I told you to. And Nietzsche's like, that's what religion's about. Bad people will do bad things, good people will do good things, but if you want good people to do bad things, you need morality, and you need religion. If you are not moral, you lack empathy, not religion. Because any moral act that you can do without religion. And if the only reason why you're doing something moral is because you're afraid of hell, or you're looking forward to the reward of heaven, then you're simply a well-trained dog. If you do the right thing simply because it's the right thing, that's moral. And if your only guideline for morality is fear of hell, then Nietzsche's like, well, then you're just a bunch of well-trained slaves. That there's nothing moral about that. In fact, that's something you should be ashamed of because you don't know yourself. Okay, moving on to the next text, Zarathustra and the Gay Science. It's actually Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and then another book, The Gay Science. I just didn't have room to stick it all up there. So his next work, he considers Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He himself said, this is it. This is the best thing. Yeah, people 1,000 years from now are going to see this as the guiding light of humanity. And I'm like, well, there you go, Nietzsche. But it's also really, really, really hard book in the sense it's written in very playful prose. I've read it maybe 17 times. There's passages where I have no idea what's going on. Like there's a tightrope walker, and then a devil pops up and pushes him off the tightrope, and he falls on the ground and he's broken. And Zarathustra walks up and he's like, I'm going to die, I'm scared to go to hell. Zarathustra says, don't worry about it, hell doesn't exist. And then he dies and he carries the corpse around with him for the rest of the book. And you're like, what? So I will not present myself as a master of Zarathustra. I do feel I understand the Gay Science, but it's a very difficult text. It's written in very playful prose, and it attacks reason itself. In the same way that he's attacking religion, he's going to attack reason. And the reason that it's hard is because he's using reason to attack reason. Or it's a work of epistemology, ironic epistemology. So it's quite a run around the block. But he makes his argument in a way that works for me in very clear philosophical terms in the Gay Science. And again, gay in this sense means happy. And he published it first, and then he worked it out dramatically in Zarathustra. So in the Gay Science, he's exploring the power of knowledge. In Zarathustra, he's exploring the consequences of knowledge. Yes?
I'm sorry if you already explained this, I might have missed it. Is Zarathustra like a character? Or an
Yeah, it's the name of the main character.
Okay.
Zarathustra is also where we get the famous line, God is dead, and we have killed him. Zarathustra is the person who says that. And Zarathustra, by all intents, seems to be Nietzsche. Nietzsche's put himself in this little fictitious world and named himself after the original Zoroastrian, which is very esoteric of him, but yeah, okay, I get it. But this sentence, God is dead and we have killed him, this is where it all comes down. And there's a lot more, like he's not just saying don't believe in God anymore. He's describing a very interesting situation that he sees Europe in. So there's the slave morality, but then there's something else. He characterizes his age as atheistic but religious. And you can think of it like this. It's very hard to think of the world in non-absolutes. The absolute can be religion, but if I take religion away, you will, out of habit, turn science into an absolute. That is, or you'll turn Nietzsche into, like, whenever I teach Philosophy 101, the undergraduate tendency to work in absolutes is profound. Like, if I explain utilitarians, everyone becomes a utilitarian. Then I explain virtue ethics, everybody, because like, to be ambivalent about something requires a lot of work. And he's like, European culture can't do it. So I don't think people, I'm speaking on behalf of Nietzsche, I don't think people actually believe in God, at least not the way that they did in the 16th, 17th century. But they're still going through the motions because they don't know how to do anything else. So while Europe is still nominally Christian, he's going to say, I think what happened is that we replaced our faith in God with a faith in science.
And so this faith in science is like saying, oh, physics is super, like, always right, but then there's that one planet out there that, like, that you
Or faith in science would be like Newton is absolutely right. And then Einstein says, I don't think so. And then what happened? People are like, oh, well then Einstein is absolutely right. And you're missing the point.
Okay, and so, but like the whole thing of knowledge about how, like, a square always has like 4 corners, there like all the sides are, is that an absolute that we think in? You know?
Do squares absolutely have to exist?
No, like, does a square always have to have all 4
No,
sides the same length?
The idea of square as we defined it will be the idea of square as we defined it. But it's not absolute that we have to define it that way, nor is it absolute that we will exist. So like Earth gets wiped out. Boom. The squares have to exist. So they're not absolutely true. We think of them as absolutely true. That's what Nietzsche's saying. Nietzsche's going to say is it's hard for you to think without putting something as absolute. And that's our problem. The way that we deal with knowledge is we are, like when Kant opened the gates and said, you're free. You no longer live in a world of absolutes. Be free. Nietzsche said, sweet, and walked out and said, hey guys, get out of the cage. It's a lot harder. So this is due to the fact that we don't recognize that we're out of the prison of absolutism yet. It takes a lot of work to get out of the prison of absolutism. Nietzsche's like, it's going to take us 1,000 years. So what Europeans were doing, arguably still, is inappropriately imposing absolutist expectations on science. We always treat science, or, okay, I'm overspeaking, but generally in the popular conversation, we treat science as if it's infallible. And Nietzsche's like, that's the exact opposite of what science is. Science is supposed to be fallible. That's what science is. It has to. That's what a scientific experiment is trying to falsify things. So in short, Nietzsche is concerned that we will raise science to a godlike stature simply out of habit.
Science, perhaps man's greatest tool in understanding how the world works. But does it lead us to truth? German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was an avid science enthusiast, but he also recognized that even science has its limitations. See, science touts the ability to explain the world when, according to Nietzsche, it can only describe it. For example, science might attempt to explain why fire burns by saying it's an exothermic combination of a combustible material with oxygen. That certainly describes how fire burns, but it doesn't quite address why. As in, why does fire exist the way that it does? Although science has allowed us to describe the world in greater detail, we're still completely clueless as to the meaning behind it all. As the philosopher who famously said, God is dead, it's obvious that he isn't criticizing science in favor of religion. But he recognizes this dilemma. Religion attempts to answer the question of meaning, but the achievements of science have cast doubt on such beliefs. Science may try to fill this void of meaning, but it can't. Because as Nietzsche said, science has no consideration for ultimate purposes. The problem for Nietzsche is most people don't recognize this limitation and instead worship science as a kind of new religion, an objective value for a godless age. Just turn on the telly and you'll see how even science can become evangelized.
And that is a scientific fact, because the Bible says so.
Proven by real science.
It is God's will.
Nietzsche dares us to take a step further, to not only think critically of religion, but to think critically of knowledge itself. For worshipping knowledge for knowledge's sake can lead to dire consequences. As he said, man shouldn't be the servant of knowledge. Knowledge should be the servant of man.
So Nietzsche's main critique is, he's like, look, all science can do is describe what it's objectively seeing. Like, there is a table right there. I can't give you purpose, I can't give you meaning, I can only accurately describe things, as they have happened over a sequence of events to give you a certain degree of predictability. There's a good chance that it's going to rain because of all these factors that I can observe, but I can't give you meaning, not the kind of meaning that religion would give you. And people don't understand that. People are looking at science as if it's going to fill that void. It's like, no, baby, that's gone. Prison's gone. You need to go make your own meaning. So with this concern about the relationship between science and truth and our religious habits, Nietzsche was very, very critical to the idea of faith. His idea of faith was also in response to Kierkegaard, who we didn't really have a lot of time to talk about, but Kierkegaard was a huge faith guy. Like, you need to have faith. The way to solve problems is with faith. And to that, Nietzsche said, a casual stroll through a lunatic asylum shows you that faith does not prove anything. The people in the insane asylum genuinely believe that they're an orange. It doesn't change the fact that they're not. You can have all the faith you want. So he argued that faith in science, the type of faith that we had in religion, will result in nihilism because it can't answer those questions. To find meaning in our lives, we had to create it, or at least find something besides religion to give it to us. He himself said, culture. We need to accept the Dionysian and raise ourselves up like the Greeks did. And Greeks here, I'm talking about like ancient Rome, Caesar, that kind of Greek. So our dependency on obedience is epitomized on faith above reason. People putting faith against evidence. Faith for Nietzsche is just a trick. It's just an expression of hegemony. It's something that's used on the poor and the ignorant. When you ask a question of like, why would God let little Susie have bone cancer? Well, you just need to have faith. This is what he called the herd, or the herda. He called most of Christianity, or most of Europe, he's like, they're just sheep. So again, he's writing his friends, telling them this, and they're like, dude, you might want to tone it down a little bit, man. And his publications were a nightmare too. His publisher went bankrupt, but you know. So teaching people to value faith over evidence is the greatest liability to human progress. And again, he's very like he's going to tell you what science is, but he's not going to say he's not going to don't stop doing science. Science is great. Just understand what it is.
With what you said about people need to create their own meaning now, like how does somebody go about doing that?
Sophrosynia. Sophrosynia. You go find your limits,
Mm-hmm.
and only you can know what they are, and the only way you can know them is through suffering. So go live boldly.
Yeah.
So due to our place in history, that is living in the wake of Christianity, we are generally incapable of thinking of knowledge outside of a religious framework, outside of an absolutist framework. So look at the way that we're, like in the contemporary conversation, you can see faith being used to describe, like people will say, well, you have to have faith in evolution, or you have to have faith in science. And Nietzsche's like, whoa, hold up right there. Let's look at how you're using that word. Again, he's a language guy. It's like, okay, when you use the word faith to describe the conclusions that someone reaches with science, what you're talking about is a set of beliefs that will change when the evidence changes. That's what science does. We thought Newton was right. Einstein came up and said, well, look at this and this and this, and we changed our beliefs. We thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Then Copernicus says, but look, eclipses. We thought that the solar system only had planets. Galileo said, look, moons. So that's, if we're going to describe conclusions that science reaches as something that has to do with faith, he's going to say, well, that's the exact opposite of what religion is. Because the beliefs that you have in religion are things that you hold on to regardless of the evidence. And so what you're doing is you're using the word faith to include its opposite. And any word that includes its opposite is meaningless. Like every now and then you'll hear people say, well, atheism is a type of religion. And my first response is, does that mean that we're all tax-free? Because, okay. But if you use religion to describe atheism, which is the antithesis of religion, then what is, the Pixar movie, The Incredibles. Remember the villain syndrome? He said, when everyone's special, no one is. So if everything's faith, nothing is. He also had a few very Nietzschean things to say about prayer. He said prayer is an expression of slave mentality. Prayer is the thing that someone who has no control over their actions does. Because, and he asked, if God already knows what you want, what's the function of prayer? Why are you doing that? And Nietzsche said, I know why you're doing that. It's to keep you in your place, because praying is begging. It's a slave begging his master. And the reason you do it is because you're a slave. Like I said, Nietzsche was a lot of fun at parties, right? Okay, we've got a little bit more to unpack with Nietzsche, but we'll have to wait until after the break because my master insists that I have you guys evaluate me. So if you wouldn't mind taking 15 minutes to do that, I appreciate it. And otherwise, have a fantastic week.
Thank you.
No, you can borrow it. Oh no, in pen? Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Are you sure?
Yeah, they scan them in. They PDF them.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
going in the folder, just fix
Yeah,
it.
just like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, take it easy.
You too. Have a good break.
Yeah, man, you too. Finish up?
You can say that.
Oh, wow, you, okay.
Yeah.
Have a good break.
Well, I think it's identifying some of the natural so it's a good. Thanks a lot. Yeah, sure. Watch over here. It almost is like I'm bad because we're next to like these objects. What you kind of have when you say object, I translate it to image, I completely take those words out and see how it's functioning, which means sometimes like it gets to the point that I don't even need to hear what said, it just seems the case. Like when you hear somebody language you don't know, if you're rating your child for saying out to it, you know what that comes to. Yeah. Or like you can now you can see you can watch kids at a distance, and just from the body language, you know if you are serving. Right? So you see that in a 20-year-old can see that in a 10-year-old, a 30-year-old can see it in a 20-year-old, a 40-year-old can see it in a 30-year-old. Which means there's probably a 60-year-old watching this right now that would be able to just rip it all apart.
Yeah.
So studying this is allowing you to kind of get
Cool stuff.
yeah, definitely. Have a great break.
You too.
Excellent.
We'll send it out for you, but if you got a lot, man.
It's all good. Thank you, Professor.
Have a good